In 1975, a little film about a 3-ton, 25-foot-long great white shark terrorized audiences across the nation. It also munched its way through the box office to become the highest-grossing film of its time, also chomping up some Academy Awards along the way, and helping launch the career of a filmmaker who would go on to become one of the most important of his time. The film was Jaws. It was Steven Spielberg's first big film from the Hollywood scene, and Brian Hatcher, we're going to talk about that today on this first installment of The Real Deal. I'm Kevin Pauley. Welcome to The Man Attic, and this is our show where we're going to take a look at films, not necessarily to tell you the story, that's your job as a viewer, but to really look at what makes films great or not so great.
Right.
And Brian, your thoughts with just getting out the gates on Jaws?
Oh, well, I mean, let's face it, Jaws is such a wonderful movie. You have a textured screenplay, you have nuanced characterization, you have a passion for detail that takes what's basically a B-movie plot and elevates it. It's not just a good film, because it's a great film, but it's also an important film and a historical film in a lot of ways.
It's on the AFI registry as I guess the 100 most important films of all time. So, you know, it's definitely worth talking about. It's my favorite movie of all time. It's a film I've grown up with. And today, we're going to take a look at just what makes Jaws such a great film. So, stick with us. We're going to go through the components that we think really makes Jaws such a fantastic film. So, of course, in the beginning, there was the word. And Brian, as an author, as an editor, as someone who's worked a lot in the field of horror, how important is the script to a film like this?
Well, you know, there's an old saying, you know, if it's not on the page, it's not on the stage. So, certainly the screenplay, Carl Gottlieb's work on this screenplay was, you know, incredible. There's a lot, and of course, Spielberg himself helped write, helped shape that screenplay.
Even John Milius had some touch on the Indianapolis speech. So,
oh, yes.
Yeah, a lot of great people worked on this, but Carl Gottlieb, I think he's sort of the unsung hero of the film. Most people know Spielberg, and they know several names from it, but if you're not an avid Jaws fanatic, and yes, we have a name, Fanatics, you really probably don't know the name Carl Gottlieb. But he was able to do the monumental task of taking Peter Benchley's novel and really stripping it down to its bare essential. And still telling a fantastic story with, again, that really great pacing, great character, and just a really, you know, nice mixture of horror, comedy. I mean, people forget how funny this film is.
Oh, yes.
And, of course, excitement.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, that's the thing about about Jaws is that, yes, it is a very scary movie. It really is. But because you have these humorous moments, and you have really touching moments between the characters also, where you get to know these characters and you get to care about them, you know, that makes, you know, the scary parts even that much more scary.
Because there's something at stake, and it's something I think we've kind of lost along the way, especially in the realm of horror. You know, in the 80s we kind of lost our way, and it became about the killer and seeing who's going to get killed next, and we're rooting for the killer to do something so inventive or creative, you know, or something with a catchphrase. And in Jaws, it's quite the opposite. I mean, granted, the shark is its own character. I mean, it really kind of is. But we care about those characters going out on that boat. We care about the people on that island. We want the shark to go away. We want it to be stopped. And that, to me, is, I think, again, it's what we kind of have lost in the field of horror. But that Jaws, you know, when you go back and look at it, it gets it so right.
Yeah, I do think that there has been this tendency in horror to take the characterization away from what has become basically the victims, and put it into the, you know, into the monsters. You know, the monsters are, of course, we care more about Jason and Freddy. They're the most important. They're the most interesting people on the screen.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
You know, so, and yes, we have kind of lost our way, I think. Although there have been a few horror movies. There have been some that have kind of gone back to that, where you really do care about the people, But yeah, that's the one thing about Jaws is that you know these people and you really, really do care about them, and you get to see a lot of their inner life, especially Brody, the main character.
Well, and the thing is, I think Carl Gottlieb was able to take, you know, a lot of the extra elements of the book, and again, a little bit of spoiler territory here, but if you've not seen the film, shame on you. If you've not read the book, it's okay, we'll talk. But this, to me, is one of the few times I'll say, and most people who are fans of the film would agree, that the film is actually better than the book. There are a lot of extra things in the book. You know, there's extramarital affairs, there's mafia, there's all these other things. And in a book, that's fine, because a book is a different medium. You have more time. But in a film, not quite as much.
That's true. And, I mean, certainly Jaws doesn't feel like a sparse movie. I mean, there's certainly a lot of things going on, you know. But it does, I mean, everything every scene supports the main plot. Even everything that goes on outside
Right.
Of men going out and going after the shark, it still supports that plot. I mean, all good subplot supports the plot.
Exactly, and this film, this screenplay is a great example of that. Again, I still don't understand how it didn't, win, for my money's worth, the Best Adapted Screenplay award, because I really think he did a great job with it.
Well, there were a lot of Oscars that movie should have gotten.
I would agree. Granted, you're going up against some big films, like especially One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but it is my favorite movie, and that's where we're at. But again, Carl Gottlieb, if you're watching out there, we're huge fans, sir. And,
oh yes,
great job on a fantastic screenplay. Now, of course, you can have the greatest screenplay in the world, you can have a talented director behind the camera, but if you don't have a great cast, it just really doesn't come together.
Oh, yeah.
And Jaws has a cast that I just look at and think everyone in it, from the background islanders to our three main characters, is just note perfect.
Oh, absolutely. And the nice thing about it being a summer movie, especially a summer movie at that time, was they weren't as concerned of getting Hollywood stars for those roles. So they basically were able to cast people that were just perfect for those roles. Even though they might not at the time have been names that people would have been that familiar with at the time, they were just, every single person in that cast was just note perfect.
Absolutely.
Just great.
It's to me, you look at and you have to look at the main three, of course. Now, again, the background characters are fantastic in this film.
Yes.
And they make you care about the islanders, which is important, because if we don't care about the island and its well-being, then we don't care as much about them stopping the shark.
Right.
But we do, because there are good people on that island. But when you look at your core three characters, you've got, of course, Roy Scheider's fantastic everyman.
Oh, absolutely.
You've got Richard Dreyfuss, who at that time was a pretty hot celebrity coming off of The Goodbye Girl, I believe.
Yeah.
So he of course had some Academy Award notoriety and was a pretty well established name. And then you had one of the most fantastic character actors of his time, the just immortal Robert Shaw as Quint. And again, for my money's worth, should have landed him an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. I think the work he does in that movie is fantastic.
Oh, absolutely.
But let's look at Brody, because I think he's an important character. He is us. He is the everyman. And what I think is interesting is that Roy Scheider really plays him just very nuanced. He doesn't play him as some big, broad, I'm the chief of police. And, he's a very normal guy.
Yeah.
And he's in a very extraordinary situation, and I think he behaves like most of us would honestly behave.
Yeah, and that's the thing. He's not your typical action movie type
Not
of
at all.
hero, but he is somebody that we can identify with.
Sure.
And so, in that sense, we really feel for this character.
Well, Brody, like you said, he's not the typical action guy. He is a character who has fears. He has a fear of the water, and what does he have to do? He has to face his greatest fear to save the island.
Right.
And that's really, that's a huge sacrifice on his part. And you've got this guy who, again, he could be played very broad and, look at me, I'm the chief. But instead we have a guy who has doubts.
Yes.
Who has fears, who has, passions. He has a family, that he cares about and loves. And of course, spoiler alert a little bit, there is a moment where this suddenly becomes very personal for him with regards to going after the shark. And when you watch the film, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you've not seen it, again, shame on you.
Yeah.
But you get a chance to really understand him. And then you bring in the sort of left and right of his brain with Hooper and with Quint.
Exactly.
And I think they're just fantastic characters because they're at odds with each other, and he kind of has to mediate the peace.
Oh, yeah.
But they all have an end goal: stop the shark.
Oh, yeah. And the thing about it is, anytime you see Hooper coming into a scene, or you see Quint coming into a scene, you're just eager. Because, something wonderful is about to happen.
Right. They really have such great dialogue. And, of course, Richard Dreyfuss has such fantastic comedic timing. And it's something that he's always been known for. Robert Shaw is just a force of nature in that film.
Yeah.
He is really just this bigger-than-life character. And I just love the interaction between the three of them. For my money's worth, I think the greatest scene I've ever seen in a movie is them in the galley, where they're sharing scars and tattoo stories. And you have Quint's, again, what should have won him the Academy Award, the speech about the USS Indiana.
Oh, yes, and what's great about that speech to me is that it's just basically the camera pointing to Quint, telling his story, and you get some reaction responses from Hooper and from Brody. But to me, it's sort of it's a tradition of thousands of years of sitting around the fire telling a story. It really honors that. It's such an homage to really where storytelling comes from. And it is a beautiful storytelling moment that needs no special effects, needs no special camera angle. It just needed to point the camera at Mr. Shaw and just let him go.
And give him a few drinks and let him go. So, but again, a cast really is so critical, and I think this film works because you have a cast of characters that we care about, that are believable.
Yes.
And that's the other thing about it too. None of them are played as a characterization. They're real people.
Absolutely.
So again, cast is so important, and this cast is one that, as far as I'm concerned, they all should have gotten some kind of an Academy Award. So. Of course, every good film needs a great captain at the helm. And I think if you were someone growing up in the 70s and 80s, you could imagine no one better than Steven Spielberg.
Oh, yeah. I mean, all the movies that he's either directed or produced or been involved with, without those films, certainly our lives would be a lot less enriched.
Oh, my childhood would be like almost depleted. Oh, yeah. Truly. And if you think about it, if not for Jaws, those films may not have happened, or may have taken longer to get to, because Jaws really put his name on the map as someone who really had arrived.
Yeah.
Now, he had done work before. He had episodes of Night Gallery, and of course had done, at that time, I think, two bigger films, which was, of course, Duel, which was made for television, but got actually distributed in theaters, because it actually did pretty daggone well. And then you have the follow-up with Sugarland Express, which is, I think, the first time he works with John Williams, and boy, that film should have been a hit. It's a really fantastic film. Very hard to find, but if you can find it, highly recommend it. But you could see, and I think that the execs at Universal could see, that this kid really had something going. He was able to tell really simple stories, but really make them look better than like a B movie in essence. Again, what is Duel but a B movie of a guy being chased by a truck?
Yeah.
Sugarland Express is kind of a simple, like a Bonnie and Clyde kind of kids on the run kind of tale.
Yeah.
But it's told with such flair and panache. It's such an interesting film to watch. And then you have Jaws, which again should be a B movie. And I love Roger Corman. Let me preface this statement by saying that. But it really would have been a Roger Corman film if the studio had kind of had their way. But Spielberg and Carl Gottlieb, of course, saw it as something more.
Oh, yeah, certainly. And I'm sure that the executives were like, it's making how much money?
They probably didn't care. At that point, it's like, oh, let that guy make more stuff.
Absolutely.
And if you think about it, Jaws has what I love about 70s cinema. And I will make the argument, I think the 70s may be the best decade of filmmaking, and that will be a discussion for a future episode. But Spielberg really gives this film a nice pace. Now, it does come out the gates with the attack on Chrissy, but then we get that sort of, the thing I love about the 70s, the slow burn.
Right.
We get a chance to really know these characters, to know the nuances of the day-to-day workings of the island and how things are going there. Chief Brody's relationship to the islanders, how he's an outsider because he wasn't born there, and just all his fear of water, all these little things that we get to know about the island.
Oh yeah.
The importance of summer dollars. And in today's modern look at Hollywood blockbusters and such, I just feel like a lot of those things would get bypassed to get to the action.
Oh yeah, well there's a paranoia with movie studios today that they feel like if you don't drag the audience along at a breakneck pace, you're going to lose them.
Right.
But Spielberg was smart enough. He gave us a taste of the shark at the beginning. We didn't see much, but we saw enough to know this was a bad situation.
Right.
And that was enough to allow us to go into the story a little bit more. We didn't need to we didn't need to keep seeing the shark killing people.
Right. Right. Now, granted, if you look at the original storyboards, we were supposed to see more of the shark killing people. And again, sometimes the mishaps that you have, such as the case of the mechanical shark, you end up finding ways to get around that, and they did. And they made a much stronger film, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
So to me, I think you look at a director like him who's able to take this wonderful cast, and it's known that Robert Shaw and Richard Dreyfuss didn't get along too well. But he was able to take that and make it work in the scenes.
Oh yeah.
And that's, a good director does that, whether it's on stage or behind the camera. A good director can take those moments of adversity and overcome them and actually even use them to make your situation stronger. And if you look at the entire making of this film, shooting it on the actual ocean, which was a bold choice by him, and he'll freely admit, looking back at it now, maybe I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's one of those things that all the choices that he made were very bold choices, and the film is a success because so much of that, I think you have to put that on him because of the choices that he made and the decisions that he made on set.
At that time, he was 26 years old.
Yeah, 26 years old.
He had the mind of an auteur with enough youthful stupidity that didn't tell him, I can't do that. I shouldn't do this.
Right.
So he just went for it. And certainly, there were a lot of times he probably just wanted to kill himself.
Oh, there were plenty of times, I'm sure.
But but such a wonderful movie that took chances.
Yeah,
you know,
and
paid off.
And
really.
it's one of those things. Spielberg is one of those directors who's always had this really neat, style and a neat eye for things. Now, granted, his later work is a little safer from what he was doing in the '70s, particularly looking at Jaws and Close Encounters and Raiders. But you can't deny the fact that the guy has had a major impact on Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
And Jaws, of course, was really the start of that, and it really showed us that this guy had an eye for making film. Now, of course, every great film, even looking back at so many films like Psycho, and of course, in this case with Jaws, without a good soundtrack, they become very different films.
Oh, certainly.
And in Jaws, you have a masterpiece, an Academy Award-winning masterpiece,
Yes.
I may add, a masterpiece of the soundtrack by someone whose name is just synonymous with great film scores, and that's John Williams.
Oh, yes. The thing about John Williams' score is that if you hear his music, you know exactly what movie it came from.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, he's created so many iconic pieces of music that you could just hum a few bars and you know it's Indiana Jones. You know it's Superman
or Star Wars.
And there's not a lot of composers today. I'd say probably Danny Elfman is just about the only one who, in relatively modern times, has created that type of iconic score.
Yeah, I think if you look at his Batman score and stuff, sure, you can see that. But with Williams, I think you got to remember with Jaws, again, this was sort of a B movie.
Oh, yeah.
And most people wouldn't have thought to do a classical score for a film like this. It's a movie about a giant shark eating people. Why are we going to have the London Philharmonic doing a score for this film? But when you look at it, the score really does so much for that film. As you and I have talked before, it has presence, it has mood, it has atmosphere.
Well, for the first part of the film, it is the monster.
Right, because you really don't see the shark, but you know when it's there when you hear those bars.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, how do you scare somebody with two notes?
That's it. You go in a pool and do it and watch people start looking at you.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing I love about this score, it's one of my favorite things about it, and it's something that you probably really don't notice it. But now that I'm saying this, I hope that you will, and I think you'll find it very interesting if you go back and look at it. They use the score to train the audience.
Oh, yes.
Because for the first half of the film, we know when the shark is coming, because we hear the dun-dun. We know something's up. We have those perspective shots underwater. Something's coming. Suddenly, we find ourselves out to sea in the second half of the film. And here's Brody, and he's chumming, and he's not happy about it.
Oh, no.
But Hooper drives the boat. Quint's fishing. He just has to do that. Suddenly, for the first time, we get a really good look at Bruce.
Yes.
And, of course, we have the iconic, you're going to need a bigger boat. But what happens in that moment that's so important is there's no score.
Exactly. No warning at all.
Your safety net has now been pulled away.
Yeah.
And now the shark is free to pop up whenever and wherever it wants, and we don't know. And that, to me, is what makes it so terrifying at that point, because now, as an audience, we're watching this thinking, oh, dear God, where is it? We don't know. And that's what makes that score so brilliant.
Oh, yeah, and not just the fact that, of course, it is the monster for a good part of the movie, but it's such a nuanced and textured score. I mean, first of all, it never overrides a scene. It's there to support the scene.
Absolutely.
And it's not just scary.
No.
I mean, there are heartbreaking moments in the score. There's funny, touching, adventuresome moments. And all the way through, there's a continuity to it, but it just is so there's so many nuances to that score. Right. It's amazing.
Well, you just have subtle moments like Brody and his son, which I think is one of my favorite moments ever put into a film. And then you have subtle moments like the USS Indianapolis speech, where all you have is just that slight score there. It's just this eerie little motif that plays. But then you also have this big adventurous pieces, like when they're chasing the shark's barrels. And it just really does have all these wonderful things that just, as you said, accentuates. It doesn't ever try to draw attention to itself.
Right.
It doesn't ever take away from a scene. It just enhances.
Yeah, and there's those moments where there is no score at all, where it was just smart enough, let's let the scene play.
Let it be. Yeah, let it play. So again, it really was the film score that even made John Williams more of a household name. He'd been around for a while. He'd done a lot of stuff, Lost in Space, things like that in the 60s. But this was the score that really made him John Williams.
Oh,
and then, of course, Star Wars took that to the next level and beyond. But you obviously have to look at this score and say that, if not for the score, the film really doesn't have the success that it has. And again, just goes to show the importance of having a great composer who can take your film and really elevate it with just music. So there you have it. Those are the components that we think make Jaws, in my opinion, the greatest movie ever made, and in Brian's, one of the greatest ever made. And that's going to bring this episode of The Real Deal to a close. This is our first episode out the gates, so we thought it'd be kind of fun to take a film that most people know. If you've not seen it, I highly recommend that you do, and I hope that this review has made you kind of consider it. And if you have seen it, I hope this review makes you go back and maybe look at some of the things that we've talked about today. Brian, your final thoughts on Jaws?
Oh, well, certainly it's not just, I mean, it's a great movie, but it's also an important film. I mean, it certainly changed the way Hollywood looked at summer movies.
Absolutely.
So they could, and it's inspired so many artists in Hollywood. I mean, scads and scads of them. So,
right.
I mean, certainly it's a great film, but it's also a very important film.
And if you're going to be a good filmmaker or just a good avid film viewer or even your own film critic, I do think it's one of those films you need to have under your belt, as it really has influenced so many people down the road. And of course, it did spark the career of Steven Spielberg and took it to that next level. So, you know, that's it for this episode. Let us know in the comments below. Do you love Jaws? Do you hate Jaws? Have you ever seen it? Have you ever seen it in a theater? Which is absolutely the best way to watch the film. It's really the only way if you can. Now, if you've not seen the film or would like to see it again, I highly recommend the Blu-ray that Universal put out just recently. It also has with it the fantastic behind-the-scenes documentary, The Shark is Still Working. Hats off to James and Roddy and the crew for making what is the end-all be-all best look at that film you'll ever see. Really one of the best making of film documentaries you'll ever see, not even just for Jaws, but for film in general. I also highly recommend you check out Carl Gottlieb's The Jaws Log. Fantastic book that really goes through the headaches and heartaches to make that film happen, from its inception all the way to the release. It has some great anecdotes, some fantastic behind-the-scenes stills. Very, very worth your time. You know, let us know in the comments below what you think. Also, let us know about what other films you'd maybe like us to take a look at, or any other topics you'd like us to take a look at. We're going to be taking a look at some other topics along the way, not just modern films and older films, but things that really made an impact in Hollywood. I know two such topics we're looking at are the creation of home box office and how that changed the way that movies came out in distribution, and also, connected to distribution, the video boom of the 1980s, how all the mom and pop video shops and in general the VHS and beta wars really made certain films maybe that had been lost along the way in their theatrical release get revisited and become cult classics or even bona fide hits in their own way down the road.
And if you like what you've seen here, certainly like and subscribe to this video, let other people know about it, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter and also Google+. The links for all of those will be in the description. Right below.
Yes. Also, if you'd like to kind of have your discussion about Jaws on the Facebook page, by all means, please do so. But if you're wanting to do it on Twitter, use hashtag TRD Jaws. And let us know your thoughts on the film in 180 characters or less.
There we go.
For me, that's impossible. But that's it for this first episode of The Real Deal. Thank you so much for joining us here in the Man Attic. Again, this is just our intro to the world to let you know that we're here. We hope you enjoyed this discussion on Jaws. And again, let us know in the comments below what you'd like us to talk about in future episodes. You are a part of the conversation down there. We do pay attention to the comments. You are very much a part of what will make this show a success. You are a part of what will make it interesting for others as well. So please know that you are a valued viewer, and you are basically a part of the crew. We refer to you as our Man Attic fanatics, and we hope you'll continue to become a Man Attic fanatic and spread the gospel of the Man Attic fanatics out there and get people here so we can keep talking about film and having a good time doing so. That's it for this first episode of The Real Deal. Until next time, I'm Kevin Pauley.
And I'm Brian Hatcher.
And we'll see you back in the Man Attic for the next episode.